Hi, today we'll be talking about the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle consists of three elements: aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. While each of these elements changes the brightness of the image, they also have their own properties. Let's explore them a bit further. Aperture. The aperture controls the brightness through a physical mechanism similar to the iris in your eye. The larger or wider it gets, the more light gets let in, the brighter the image. Conversely, the smaller it gets, the less light gets let in, the darker the image. The aperture is measured in f-stops. The lower the f-stop number, the larger the aperture opening. A property associated with the aperture is called depth of field. Depth of field refers to how blurry or out of focus parts of the image are. The larger the aperture, the blurrier the background. The smaller the aperture, the more in focus the background is. You can use this property to guide your viewer's attention to a specific part of your image. Shutter speed. Much like the aperture, shutter speed controls the brightness through a physical mechanism. Shutter speed indicates how long the shutter is held open to let in light. This is usually measured in fractions of a second, but in still photography it can increase to whole seconds. The property most associated with shutter speed is blurry or crisp motion. Blurry motion comes from slower shutter speeds, crisp motion comes from a faster shutter speed. In video production, for realistic motion similar to how your eye perceives the world, which is some motion blur but not a distracting amount, it's best to set your shutter speed to double your frames per second. Usually this means a shutter speed of 1/48th of a second or 1/60th of a second. ISO. While the aperture and shutter speed are both physical elements, the ISO controls the amount of brightness digitally. The higher the ISO value, the brighter the image. High ISO comes with a trade-off, however. The more you increase the ISO, the more digital noise comes into your image. The lower the ISO, the less digital noise is in your image. If you've ever increased brightness while taking a photo or video on your phone, this is the exact same thing. Digital noise looks almost like dancing colored snowflakes and can be quite distracting. Summary. So, to summarize, today we discussed the three elements of exposure. These work together to create proper exposure. You will likely be using a combination of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to properly expose your image. Keep in mind the trade-offs of each of these elements. Thank you for watching.